Hi everyone. Happy February. I can't believe it's already February. I don't know where the time has gone. I don't know where this year has gone. January was such a beautiful month for us because the kids were back to soccer. There was no snow and ice and minus degrees like we normally have in early January, where we end up having the season quite delayed the first week or two, and the kids don't go back, and there's kind of this waiting period, and it just feels like it ends up messing with sort of the rhythm of the early year, and the kids don't like it. They want to get back into their routine. They want to get back to their stuff. They want to see their friends. They want to see their coaches. But we're in a really blessed situation right now where both kids just absolutely love their coaches. And now we're in February. It's just crazy. So my name is Rachel. Welcome. This is Wool and Spinning. This month, I thought that I would spend a few minutes talking about what 10 years of spinning taught me about wool. I've been spinning I got my first spinning wheel in 2007, but I really didn't embrace being a hand spinner until sort of 2014 when my youngest was born. So we're coming up on, well, in June, it's going to be 12 years that I've been sort of back, spending the time that I spend on spinning. It's been very consistent for these last 12 years. And I've always been a knitter with a capital K. I love knitting. I've always been a knitter. I will probably always be a knitter. But I think, as you progress and as you spend time at the wheel and you work with different fibers and you meet other fiber folk out there, as you spin through that first decade and you get that sort of under your belt, it really changes how you see wool and how you see fiber in general. When I first came back to spinning in 2014, I sort of had this idea that wool was not so much a variety of fibers, but was sort of one thing. And merino and wool in the lay public is often used interchangeably, sort of like Kleenex and tissue. And the merino has sort of lost its meaning in terms of being a specific sheep breed. People use wool and merino interchangeably. And I don't usually correct people that are sort of out in the lay public. If they're open and they're interested, I'll sort of say something. But I think when I came to spinning, it wasn't that I knew there were different sheep breeds. I didn't realize that there were quite so many that we had opportunities to explore as hand spinners. So as I deepened my practice and as I deepened sort of my thinking around wool and learned more and had mentors guide me, that was when I started to sort of realize that there was way more to it and a much bigger conversation than just merino and spinning wool, and we're going to make yarn and we're going to make a 2-ply and we're going to use it. It's sort of a very entry level understanding, and I needed to start there to be able to have something to build on. I mean, that's the journey of the learner, right? You sort of start here and you end up over here. The learning curve felt very steep, but because I was a knitter and I understood what I was looking for in yarns and why I wanted to spin these yarns, my learning curve was steep, but it was quick. So early in my spinning sort of journey, I think I really looked at wool as something that had to be mastered. It was like, I'm going to take this raw material and I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to fix it. And I think it's a very honest approach. Like, I think that's a very normal response. So often when we're chatting with our best friends or our partners or our family, and maybe we're going through something, we're experiencing something, we're having sort of an existential crisis about something, it's so often the other person wants to fix it. Like, that's a very human thing, to want to help one another and want to fix things, and sometimes we just want somebody to listen. Sometimes we do want advice, and sometimes we just want the other person to be quiet and to just sort of rubber duck with us. And I don't know if some of you maybe haven't heard that before, but in the tech industry, when somebody's practicing pitching and they're practicing sort of how to make a sale or to pitch an idea, they'll put a rubber duck on their desk and they'll talk to the rubber duck, and it's called rubber ducking. It's actually like, it's a thing, you can Google it. And I think sometimes when we are going through something, or we're trying to explore an idea, or we're trying to fix something in our life, or this thing happened to us and we just need to debrief about it, we just need the other person to sort of rubber duck with us. That we need them just to be there and make us feel like somebody is listening, right? And I think in some ways, with when I first came to, working with wool and with some of the different fibers and whatnot, I sort of viewed it as something that like was sort of, there for the taking. It was like I just, needed it to just be there and be what it was. And I was going to spin it and I was going to make this perfect yarn, which we talked about last month. And it was either good fiber or it was bad fiber. And that sort of good versus bad conversation is like a whole other, thing, because it's very polarizing, right? And it's very black and white. And I was always looking for sort of the right fleece, the right wool, the right project, something that sort of fit this narrative. And because I wasn't willing to give up, and I was going to continue along on this journey, you start to sort of realize that like wool comes from somewhere and it's been cultivated, and you have these, especially hand spinners fleeces, you've got shepherds who like really care about their animals, and there's usually a history there because there's a breeding history, or there's the way they got started, or there's a legacy there in terms of like multi-generational. There's context in terms of like, what type of wool is it? Where did it, what types of yarns are we hoping to create? Where in the world were these sheep originally bred, and what were the environmental conditions? There's the memory in the fibers themselves, and sort of that place animal handling became more important than what the label said. This is a blue ribbon fleece. Okay, wonderful. But what about all these other fleeces that didn't get a blue ribbon? Often because of expectations and pressures that we put on ourselves, those non-blue ribbon fleeces are actually going to be a better experience for us because it's not a blue ribbon fleece. It doesn't have that label on it. And we can get into, learning like, what's that type of wool, what's the best intended use for it? Have you spun a yarn like that before? Could you explore that? Other people with maybe more knowledge, more experience, who've maybe written on the subject or talked on the subject, what have they done with those types of wools? Where in the world do you live? I think that was one of the things that I really had to come to peace with almost. I live in the Pacific Northwest. It is damp most of the year. We don't get a ton of snow. It doesn't get really super cold, but it's damp and it's wet. I don't need a really big heavy sweater that's going to resist -30 and a wind chill, because I'm probably have some waterproof wind resistant jacket over top because I need to be waterproof. But I want something warm underneath that can move and isn't super thick, that can be put under a heavy jacket. So what type of wools work for that? And that's sort of over time starting to change that conversation. I remember on the podcast, actually, I remember a few times where I would say, and this was when I was sort of starting to figure some of this stuff out, I remember saying stuff like, I don't want it to be super thick. Like, I don't want a sweater that's like really super thick and heavy and really super warm. I'm going to do the 2-ply instead. So I've got a bit of drape and it's a bit thinner. That was when, I started to realize that some fibers and some of the raw wools were going to work better in my environment than others. Part of this conversation is learning how wool behaves and learning about the properties and the different wool classes. That was a big aha moment, actually. Learning about the wool classes, that was like, boof, like mind blown. Because it was sort of all of a sudden, it wasn't just wool equals merino. It was, what are the long wools and what are they good for? And what can they offer us, and why do the sheep specifically do so well in this climate? The downs, oh my goodness, like, let me wax poetic about the ways that the downs behave, and the 3-dimensional crimp. they're completely overlooked by most hand spinners early in their careers because they don't appreciate them just yet. They haven't learned enough about them yet. These aren't fibers to be tamed and ruled over. These are fibers to be like, what's the best place to use them in? How can we optimize them? If we add a little bit of silk, what does that do to the fiber, to the fabric? How does that work? We don't need to rule with an iron fist over these things. And then, time shapes my respect for these fibers. Learning to listen to my hands. The draft might be the same when you're working with one wool versus another, but the way that you handle the fibers as you draft is different. And I think that nuance is often lost and missed. So we talked last month about looking for the perfect yarn, wanting to emanate those perfect yarns and the yarns that sort of feel and look more like a commercial yarn, and recognizing that in itself is a moving target. As I collected information and as I learned and as I realized how nuanced this conversation was, I started to realize that that inconsistency sometimes in our singles, that slight inconsistency sometimes in the plying, that's all part of it. And in the fabric, you can't tell. You cannot tell. And so then you start to sort of, deepen and appreciate the fabrics that you're creating, the yarns that you're creating. You view them with a slightly less critical eye, which of course we talked about last month as well. You slow down, you observe, you reflect, you knit your swatch because you know it's the right thing to do, but now you do it because it's part of your process and it's part of how you learn more about the types of yarns that you're making. There's just this sort of deepening of the process and this respect for the process, listening to your hands. It's one thing to watch someone draft and one thing to watch somebody do the same thing over and over. It's another thing to recognize that there's a slightly different wool management technique as they're drafting a long wool versus a down. For example, with a down, when I do the continuous backward draft, for example, so it's pinch, pull back, slide, pinch, pull back, slide. When I'm spinning it down, more often than not, my pinching fingers, the fingers that are sliding over the singles to move back, are not smoothing. They're kind of lifting off of the singles and sliding to the next pinch point. Whereas with long wools, I'm not going to lift my fingers. I'm going to slide them along to create that more worsted style, that smoother yarn. And I'm always going to rewind those. And so, recognizing that all of these things, as you're amassing your own internal knowledge about all these different types of wools and all these different types of ways of creating all these different types of yarns to create different fabrics. When you slow down and you observe how these little changes and these little nuances in all of our yarns impacts the final fabric, you really start to respect that ability to observe, that ability to recognize that there's nuance, that ability to see that one fabric isn't quite the same as another fabric, that it's behaving a little bit different. And sometimes putting your finger on it can be really difficult. Sometimes putting your finger on exactly what it is that's different can be really hard. And I recognize that. And I think for some of us, it's sometimes even difficult sometimes to find the language. And that's where community comes in, and that relationship with other hand spinners, that relationship with the wider community. Hey, this is what I'm seeing. I'm not sure how to describe this. Oh, I ran into that as well. I called it blah, blah, blah. And that really helps. But I think as you gain that experience and as you amass more yarns, you make more yarns, but also respect how long it takes, having a daily practice, embracing that daily practice, even if it's 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be 15 minutes, 20 minutes a day. It can be 5-10 minutes. But having that daily practice, all of that, it gives you patience, it gives you discernment, and it makes you realize that there are very few absolutes in this craft that we all love. I think what I've learned as I've gone further and further into my spinning practice, particularly over the last sort of 5 years. I think I've really realized that there are no hard and fast rules. We knew and we know that there's no spinning police, but the more I learn, the more I'm like, yeah, you can really push the boundaries of what we think is right and wrong. Look at Ply Magazine. Look at how nuanced all the different topics that they explore in each episode, or each issue, sorry. Look at how one topic has so many different ways of approaching it. Like, there is no absolutes. It is not black and white. It is so nuanced. But isn't that true of life? You know, isn't that true of the larger, our larger sort of worldview, right? Things aren't so black and white. And I think that bigger picture is really important to keep in mind. You know, wool, I think of wool as like my collaborator. I think of wool as like my partner. I'm doing an article right now for Ply Magazine. I can't say too much about it, but one of the things that has been really interesting about it is, you know, pushing wool to sort of the outer limits of, you know, at what point do we lose the wool properties? And it's not a problem. It's not even... It's not something I have to solve. It's just, what are my observations? What am I looking at? And seeing wool as sort of like, I don't want to lose all of the wool properties if I'm creating X fabric. For a sweater, if it's a drapey open cardigan like this, which is one of my absolute most favorite garments I've ever made, is it perfect? No. Was the yarn perfect? Absolutely not. Did I make some like cardinal mistakes? 100%. And I even talked about it on the podcast and was like, don't do this. These are the things I tell you not to do, and I'm doing them as I'm knitting this cardigan. But maybe I do want a higher percentage of the other fiber to create that drape and that openness of a cardigan like this, and not so warm that I can't wear it under my heavier waterproof jacket that we talked about earlier. But maybe I'm going to weave with the yarn, and maybe I'm going to create a really drapey, beautiful piece of fabric for a stole or a scarf, something that I need to be really soft, that I want it to have really beautiful folds and movement for light and dark shadows to really, you know, pull the person viewing it in, but also the wearer to really feel, you know, wrapped in warmth and luxury. And maybe I'm happy to let go of some of those wool properties. Maybe now is the time to sort of let the wool properties take a back seat and allow that other fiber to come forward. So I see it as like this sort of relationship of like shifting back and forth. And that's why we have to spend a lot of time. I think time is the most underrated spinning tool. And when we talk about daily practice and we talk about how long it takes to become sort of an expert spinner, the reality is that we have to spend time getting to know our materials. And it's not just getting to know our tools, it's getting to know the materials that we're working with, understanding how the different long wools act, understanding how the different fine wools act. Why is one wool, even if it's classified under the fine wool class, why is it more medium than it is super fine? And understanding how that can change our fabrics, and how it can change, let's say, the durability or the wear and tear of a garment. As you guys know, this is an incredibly long conversation. Spinning is a long conversation. It's a conversation that happens in relationship, right? We have these conversations all the time in our communities online, whether it's, you know, on Instagram or YouTube when we're doing the live stream for the show. Here, you know, down in the comment section, all of this stuff in this, you know, movement of ideas and the growth of ideas, it's really, really, really important. And I think wool has really helped me to sort of deepen that conversation and to really embrace that conversation. These are the kind of conversations that we have inside the woolen spinning community. And if these resonate, and if it feels like a place that you would maybe be able to call home, we would love to welcome you and to have you join us. I will see you guys again next month. And until then, happy spinning and happy embracing the nuance. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.